This is, as a second half, will be more diverse, and we have a couple of other panelists here, obviously. Sue Gray, we already know, and has been introduced, and this is Pat Cox, who was the advisor on occupational health and safety in the Prime Minister's office. And she has been a health and safety officer in industry for something like 17 years. She's a skipper of ships and lots of other amazing talents. But basically, Pat's interest is realizing that this needs to be an occupational health and safety issue very strongly, especially for certain professions that are exposed to EMFs heavily.
Get on your back.
Okay, so we've got all kinds of questions. I'll try to direct them to the person who would be, at least to start the discussion, be most appropriate. Okay, so let's see. Let's start with one for Dariusz, if we could. A lot of political ones here, so. All right, let's find. Okay. Are you aware of any? All right. Are you aware of any? Let me just get this handwriting here. Protection, preventative, such as clotting or supplements that can support, and would you use in a case, so basically, what protections, including supplements, do you think could be used for people for EMFs?
He use it also in case of involvement.
I'm sorry?
And also he will use it in case of deployment.
There are no such things. First of all, because we don't know what kind of, if any, biological effects will be induced by this exposure. Furthermore, we don't know what biochemical reactions are being affected in human body by 3G, 4G, or 5G millimeter waves. We don't know because we don't have studies. As long as we don't know what is there happening, using any kind of chemicals or supplements to combat it, it is just a guesswork. You can eat anything and drink anything and imagine that it will be helping. The other thing what is every now and then recommended is to use some technical protective gadgets, so some shields or stickers or something like this. If you hear about stickers or any kind of labels to be attached to your cell phone and they will suck in radiation, don't be stupid, don't go for it. There is no such a thing. If you attach small sticker to your cell phone, that it will be from all around you suck in radiation and you will not be exposed. This is just sham. On the other hand, there are also shields, but in case of cell phones, those shields that are put on cover of the phone, then they are counterproductive, or they might be very counterproductive, because if you have a shield and you don't know from which direction, and certainly you don't know, is coming communication between your cell phone and cell tower. This shield may be preventing correct communication between your cell phone and cell tower. And in this situation, cell phone will crank up radiation emission in order to better communicate because it is disturbed. And therefore, using shield on a cell phone, you will expose yourself most likely more to radiation than otherwise. The only shield that it is really useful is for laptops, because we are not being informed enough about changes in technology. When laptops were developed, they didn't have connection to internet. Therefore, it was fine to put them on lap. But once they were developed this way that they have wireless connection to internet, it is no more okay, because your lab is being exposed to wireless radiation emitted by laptop being kept on your lap. And there is one way to prevent this exposure, namely there are shields that you can put surface between your legs and your laptop and keep it still on lap, but this radiation emitted by laptop will not be absorbed by your body. So this is only thing that I know, but otherwise I don't know anything. Some people say that maybe some supplements, since for example 3G and 4G radiation has been indicated to induce so-called oxidative stress. Therefore, chemicals or supplements that are scavengers for free radicals could be of help, but will they be? I don't know. Therefore, I cannot recommend. Scavengers of free radicals, in principle, are not bad for health because they may lower risk of developing any and every cancer. So, but there is nothing specific for wireless radiation.
Dariusz, when you spoke about mechanisms, I'm sure you're aware of the work of Martin Pall. What do you feel about the voltage-gated calcium channels as a mechanism for metabolic disturbance?
Martin Pall, by himself, he didn't do any research. He just reviewed research that has been done by others, so this is one misunderstanding. Secondly, yes, calcium channels are likely involved, same way as free radicals are likely involved, same way as stress response is likely involved. Because if you look at cell physiology, anything and everything is regulated by calcium channels, stress response, free radicals. You can use inhibitors of any of those processes, and they are very complex processes, and you can inhibit any and every function of cell. Therefore, it would be surprising if calcium channels would not be involved, similarly as it has been shown also for stress response proteins and as it has been shown for free radicals. Therefore, likely they are involved. But problem is that those mechanisms are very unspecific and they regulate anything and everything. And therefore, it is difficult to pinpoint to which degree which of those regulatory mechanisms is involved in effects of what kind of radiation or so it is still a lot of work to do, but nobody is doing it experimentally.
Thank you. This is probably a question for both you and Sue. Now, you're not aware probably of the workings of the Green Party in New Zealand, but Sue is. The question here from Duran is that the Green Party, Noeline actually, the Green Party uses the World Health Organization as the basis for their stance or position on that 5G is safe. So what would be your comment, both Dariusz and Sue?
Well, my comment is I don't see how they can be using the World Health Organization and saying it's safe in the same breath, because clearly it's been classified as a Class 2B carcinogen, and that means that it's not safe because nobody knows it's safe, and it's what I said at the introduction, who assumes the risk of what we don't know? We don't know, as Dariusz has said, we don't know if it's safe or not, but the red flags are all up. The very fact that there's an increased incidence in brain tumours from exposure to cell phones shows that non-ionising radiation can cause biological effects, and it can cause very serious biological effects. And our New Zealand standard NZS 2772.1 1999, which was written in 1999, does not protect against biological effects. It was never intended to. If you read the front page of it, it says that. So you can't justify, I don't believe the Green Party can justify their position on this. And indeed, when Sue Kedgley was in the Green Party, they had a completely different position. Their position then was that we needed far more protection against electromagnetic radiation. She wrote that in a select committee report in 2008, I believe it was.
I think that we have to explain first here what WHO means. When you hear on the news that WHO thinks that EMF is safe or not safe and so on. First of all, is WHO this huge organization? Within it has been established in 1996 WHO EMF project, so project dealing with electromagnetic radiation. And this, all opinions that you hear that WHO this or that, these are opinions of EMF project. These are not opinions of whole WHO as such. Then also it's necessary to remember that IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer, is agency of WHO, of World Health Organization, but when IARC classified cell phone radiation as possible human carcinogen, afterwards WHO EMF project has said there is no proven health effects of electromagnetic radiation. Therefore, if somebody is saying that WHO says that there are no risks, it means that WHO EMF project says that there are no risks, and WHO EMF project doesn't consider or doesn't care of the opinion of IARC, another WHO agency.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. I have my own question, which probably could apply to all three of you, and that is because the effects of 5G in a real-life situation will be so complex. We're talking about pulsed waves, polarized waves, phased array antennas, and the beaming. Is it realistically possible to think that this could be simulated in a laboratory in any meaningful way? And if not, then the second part of the question is, does that not constitute an experiment on the public, which in itself is a violation of international treaties and conventions on human rights and a criminal offense? So if maybe Dariusz could respond to the first part.
Well, this technology is very, very, very complex, and we still don't know how it will be finally developed, because, for example, once I mentioned this meeting in China where I was recently, and even then there was the kind of very funny discussion where scientists who are developing these ideas how this 5G antennas will be deployed, that there will be good communication between cell phones for 5G already developed and antennas that, because of poor penetration of millimeter waves. So, for example, they were debating how to do it in big railway station, where is in this hall where people are waiting, there is a lot of people who will be absorbing this radiation, a lot of obstacles, how to make sure. So one idea was, and it was very seriously considered, whole floor will be one antenna. And then always you get contact between antenna and cell phone. So this technology is very complex, and simulating it in laboratory is always a very big problem, and so far those simulations are always some kind of approximations which afterwards appear to be completely out of touch with real life.
And on another species, of course, as well.
Yeah, my view is that there's a real disconnect between science and law. And the reason I say that is with science you have to prove basically 100% certainty, or to a very high degree of certainty, that your hypotheses are right or not. And if you can't prove that, it's assumed to be a non-result or proof that your hypothesis was wrong, but it doesn't prove whether it's safe or not. And in law, it depends whether you're proving criminal law, which is beyond reasonable doubt, or whether you're proving in a civil case, which is on the balance of probabilities, or whether you're looking at the Resource Management Act and effects and health and safety type law, where it's a lot lower threshold, where you have to protect against possible harm and identified possible harm. And so we actually have quite a complicated problem that the science actually can't deliver for us for the type of policy, real-life risks that we have. And my view is we actually need to be a bit more creative and look at it a different way and start looking at it more like a big jigsaw puzzle, where we can put in the pieces that we have got, and as we get more and more pieces, we start to get a very clear picture of what's going on. And at some point, there's enough pieces in that jigsaw puzzle that we've got a red flag or a lot of red flags. And if you do it like that, as you put in more pieces, you get a clearer and clearer picture, and you might have to change a few around because more information becomes known, but you get a much more better correlation between what we need as people to protect us than we're getting by waiting for these long studies to be completed. So our laws are not designed to protect against new technologies. And the people who write the laws at the moment are quite happy about that because they're generally making money from the new technologies. But our laws are not protecting us. And that's what our laws should be doing, and they're actually not fit for purpose at the moment, the way it's all being done. So I think we need a much bigger review of what we're doing.
Pat, would you like to comment on how occupational health and safety regulations apply to this?
Okay, well, I would be looking at it using the precautionary principle and risk assessment, starting off with identifying the hazards. So, you'd be looking at how much Wi-Fi is in an office, how many monitors you're surrounded by, where's the key room that stores all the machinery, how many phones have you got, because some workplaces you've got a work phone and your personal phone on you. I know when I worked up in central government, everybody had 2 phones with them all the time. And it wasn't until I worked on a floor with, I don't know how many monitors there were and how many bits and bobs under the desks, that I actually started to experience myself tingling in my hands and tingling on my face. And it wasn't until I was only there on a 6-month contract, and it wasn't until I came back to my home, which is near Havelock, and just looking at some of the information that was coming through, that I attributed that to exposure to the radiation. And so for me now, that would be one of the things that I would it's a hazard. So then you've got to implement controls as best you can. And at the end of the day, it's about keeping the employee safe. So every organisation that is going to rely totally on the use of 5G and have cell towers with beams going into the offices 24/7 or whatever are going to have to consider how they're going to manage it. So food for thought going forward, but what Sue says is right too, it's a jigsaw. So the controls that you put in now to try and manage it will certainly alter as we gain more information, and then maybe more things become available that you can, like Dariusz mentioned, the protector pad that you can put your laptop on. As technology, there will be more things come out, and maybe we have to implement those too. But for now, I have got, I've been given a risk register that is quite comprehensive that came from the education authorities in Victoria. And that would be my key thing now that I would be happy to share with organisations, because it's from preschool right through to residential care, right through to workplace organisations.
Yeah, and especially police. I mean, just carrying around a huge amount of devices in their work. Now, to go back to, this is Angela's question. Can a town boycott 5G? Can a street boycott 5G? Let's see, there's a few questions here. Let's start with those.
So from 2008, regulations were passed by the then Minister for the Environment, Trevor Mallard. They were changed in 2012 and again in 2016 in New Zealand to basically say that all emissions that complied with the 1999 New Zealand standard are safe. And so they cannot be treated as an effect under the Resource Management Act. They're effectively a permitted activity. So any emissions for any of those are permitted, and you cannot stop them under normal resource management processes. Now, it's very clear that many communities are concerned about this, and I've been speaking all around New Zealand. I've got 22 different places I've either spoken at or have been scheduled to speak to, and then over the next few weeks. And everyone's asking the same question: what can we do? And it's a really important question, because even the World Health Organization has got a report out that says that communities must be consulted with. Part of the process for for communities under the World Health Organization for radio frequency radiation is communities must be informed, and informed decisions must be made. Now, our regulations are the opposite. They're deeming that these emissions are safe, and they're saying there's no need for communities to be involved. So there's a lot of initiatives happening around New Zealand. One is to challenge the regulations and say those regulations do not achieve the purpose of the Resource Management Act, because how can it be sustainable management to force radiation on every community around New Zealand without those communities having any say at all?
And that ties in with another question from Sunshine, how to hold councils accountable for protecting our health when currently they say it's out of our hands.
Yeah, and that's part of the same thing, that the intention, and it's written in the Cabinet papers by Nick Smith, our local MP, and others, that the intention is to nationalise decision-making on these things and to take it away from local communities. And I started out thinking that it was a waste of time talking to our councillors, because that was the intent of those regulations. But having gone around New Zealand, it's very clear that our local councils do have a really important role, because our local councils reflect the views of our local people, and they are an important voice for us, from local people through to national government, central government. So if every community in New Zealand that's concerned lobbies their local councils really strongly and informs the council, we want to be 5G free, we want you to go to our central government, to the Minister for the Environment, the Minister of Health and the Minister of Communications, and say, hey, we don't want this. It's not safe, it's not sustainable, we don't want it. If enough councils do that, things will have to change, because our councils are our local voice. And it's happening. It's happening in Queenstown, it's happening in Arrowtown, it's happening in Nelson, will hopefully happen in Nelson. It's happening in Hawke's Bay, huge meeting like this in Hawke's Bay, happening in Whangarei, happening in Auckland, Waiheke Island, all over New Zealand. People are standing up and saying, this is not okay, we need to do something. So wouldn't it be great if our Nelson Council will take the same step for us? And I congratulate Tim for being here today to listen to the
And Trudy.
Fabulous, thank you. It's fantastic having you here, because this is a conversation we need to keep going.
Okay, Dariusz, I have a question. There are many people who say that there are over 10,000 peer-reviewed studies on the health effects of 2G through 4G. So if you could comment on that, but also when we talk about electrohypersensitivity, is it not reasonable to assume that we are human beings, in spite of our adaptability and the fact that our body is an ecosystem with amazing compensatory capabilities, that we are suffering increasing assaults from chemicals, from radiation, even from Fukushima? We're suffering assaults from so many different directions that to be sensitive today it means an overload. And that overload can come from numerous sources. And that is entirely unreasonable to keep overloading the biosphere with increasingly unnatural things. And 5G represents a massive increase of that.
Okay, first about those numbers of published studies. It is incorrect number. There are published more than 10,000 studies on effects of any and every electromagnetic field on biological systems. But when you look in database, how many studies have been published on wireless communication radiation, then it is less than 1,500 studies all together. So this talk about this 10 or 20,000 studies, I don't know who and where from began this gossip, but it is not truth. Truth is that they are mixed, as you would say, that there are many fruits, but you are interested only in oranges. So you don't care about apples, pears, or other fruits. So in basket can be lots of fruits, okay, but your fruit is orange. In basket is 10,000 of studies on effects of different types of electromagnetic fields, but there is only 1,500 about studies on electromagnetic fields that are being used in 1, 2, 3, and 4G technology, and now 5G. So there is much less. And whether it is enough, as scientists I say it's not enough, because you have to remember unfortunate fact. Majority of peer-reviewed studies are of low quality. I don't want to say they are garbage, but they are of low quality. Very often people think that, okay, this study has been published in peer-reviewed journal, so it is sort of nobilization of the study. This must be some scientific study. Believe me, if you know science, if you read many peer-reviewed studies, you are wondering why and how they were published. In fact, with number of scientific journals around the world, which goes in tens of thousands, any study, no matter how bad, in due time will be peer-reviewed and published. And if you cannot do it normally, you will pay for it and it will be published, and then it will be peer-reviewed study. So the scientific evidence, fact that something has been published and is peer-reviewed doesn't mean that this is good. So out of these 1,500 studies that have been published on wireless radiation effects on humans and biological systems, also many are this kind of, that they are not of sufficient quality. Some of them are too small, some of them are not of not sufficient quality. And you can, when you are designing study, if you like, you can make it to fail. Not only that you make mistakes or something like this when you are executing, but in designing study. Let me give you an example. This NTP study, what was mentioned earlier, this big toxicology study done in US, they were using 90 rats per group. And they have some cancers that appear 1 or 2 cancers spontaneously within a group of 100 animals. So meaning this, how many animals you use, you a priori know that at least a couple of cancers, they will appear spontaneously, no matter whether you will expose them or not expose them. And to increase sensitivity of study, to make sure that results are really reliable, you use more animals. Now, Japanese and Korean scientists are going or are planning to repeat this American NTP study. Of course, they are saying that they don't have enough money, they don't have $30 million. Okay, so they are using less money, and they were looking how to design this study. What they came up, that they will use less animals. Instead of 90 or more, they use only 70 animals. They are decreasing their sensitivity. What I can say now, mark my words, if this study is done and executed, there is no effect found for sure, because it will not have enough sensitivity. So meaning there are studies that are being designed for reason or another. There are planned things that affect final result, outcome of the study. So meaning that we can very easily design negative study, and there will be one more negative study, no effect. So this is this problem.
I also read recently that the editor for decades of the New England Journal of Medicine claimed that 75% of the studies were basically to be discounted because of all kinds of influences. But could you comment on the irrationality of continuing to expose the biosphere to increasingly unnatural assaults, and how that is just common sense?
It is common sense that why to make anything and everything wireless? Why we are making it? Because maybe for some people it is convenient. For other people it is very cheap. It is very cheap to set up wireless network as compared with digging cables underground and maintaining them. So it is very, very cheap way of setting up communications and doing things. But also we have to remember that we ourselves are responsible for what is happening. Namely, in some cities, when I lecture, for example, in Finland, people were saying, we had a cell tower with one big antenna. Now they want to build another cell tower with several antennas. Why? Do we need it? Why it is so? Yep, you need it. Why? Because each antenna has certain capacity of information that it can receive and send. And when people start to watch movies on their cell phones, when they use very extensively all kinds of apps, Facebook, whatever applications they have on their cell phones, meaning they are sending lots of information. So after everybody is beginning to use multiple apps and very extensively to, for example, watch movies, send lots of information, so capacity of single antenna is not enough, so it's necessary to add few more. So it is not just this that telecoms want to provide more, yet certainly they want, because they make money of it, but also they have to, because otherwise people complain, my phone is not working properly, why it is so, why it is not working? No, it will be working better when we put more antennas. And this is this kind of perpetual problem. We want more services and faster services and so on, but it requires also bigger and faster networks, more antennas. So this is also a question. We as users perpetuate this problem by requiring more and more wireless connections, easier, faster, whereas not everything has to be all the time wireless. We can possibly manage quite well with wired connections in very many circumstances. In schools, in our homes, we don't have to have wireless everything. We can plug in to wire if this wire is there, and so on.
Thank you. Now, those are important points. Now, it's very frustrating, but we do have time limits, and I'm sure we could go on for a long time.
On that
Yes, sure.
Just what I'd like to say is I think it's really important that we, instead of having all technology is good or all technology is bad, we think about mindful use of technology. But we can't be mindful in our use of technology unless we're educated about the risks. And if we're educated about the risks, then we can give informed consent to the technology, and we can ask better questions, we can demand better answers from people. But at the moment we have a big problem because we're told it's safe. And our children are told it's safe. And our schools have got Wi-Fi because it's the latest and the greatest without any consideration of the risks or any considerations of the uncertainties. So we're trapped in this crazy spiral where it's driven by the people that are making money out of it, and the public and the local bodies and the bureaucrats and central government aren't providing any sort of counter-argument to balance it back the other way. So it's great that everybody's here because this is a way of becoming informed so that we can actively engage in the debate and start to ask the questions that the people that are representing us are not asking. And that's the way we can start to turn it around.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is just have everyone. Now, Pat, I'm aware you didn't speak much, but okay. I'd like to have everyone just make a closing comment, and then I've got a few things to give to people. So.
Okay. There is no way to stop progress and development of new technologies. Just we as people should learn that these technologies should be tested before they are massively deployed. We are not talking about small things, we are talking about massive deployments. If we are talking about Elon Musk planning 40-something thousand satellites beaming Wi-Fi towards Earth for the purpose that anybody in fields, in forests, wherever on Earth can connect to Wi-Fi. This is using this kind of approach that we do it because we can do it. So if I can do it, so I do it. But let's go to extreme. We can deploy internet, wireless internet from space on Earth, so we will do it. Let's ask transplant surgeon what he can do. He can put human head on pig. Should we do it because we can do it? We can medicate this pig with human head, that this head will be not rejected and that this pig will be running around. I've been for years and years working in transplantation research because we can. So this is also this kind of question. We can do this wireless technology, so we are doing it, but should we be doing everything wirelessly? But the reason is one. When you read reports from the industry, you see this number, 1 and 12 zeros. These are profits for next 10 years from 5G technology.
Thank you. So if you, the final question I was going to ask you anyway was people really want to know what can we do. So if you could include that in your summation.
Okay, the way I see it is we've become sort of victims of our own world. And what we need to do is to get out of that sort of victim mentality where we're defending ourselves against all these different changes in technologies and medications and everything else, and actually start to have a vision of what we do want. Because we live here, and if we don't choose what we want, somebody else is going to choose it for us. So we need to start looking in the big picture. Where is our community going? Where is our world going? Do we really want artificial intelligence taking over everything we do? Do we want robotics? Do we want driverless cars? Or do we actually want to go back to being what people really are and in touch with nature, connected with our communities? And we need to start having these conversations. 19 years ago, when the government thought about introducing genetic modification to New Zealand, we actually had a conversation. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but at least we had a process where our views were taken into account, and we had a discussion if we wanted it or not, and what the risks were and how we could manage it. We've lost all of those sort of democratic processes over the years. So what I believe we need to do is to start to think about these things, what we want and how we're going to get those things. We've got election year coming next year. That is 1 year in every 3 where we've actually got a chance to choose, to use democracy and to choose wisely for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, and get things back on a much better track. So that's my first recommendation of what we can do. And until then, we've just got to make the biggest possible fuss so that they know we're here, and we're not going to let our decision makers get away with making decisions by default that don't look after us and our planet.
Okay, so we already have identified cell phones as a hazard in workplaces. Either, people are walking, talking, not looking where they're going. They've been identified as a distraction. I think the next step that we now start looking at, and we raise it, the fact that the radiation is also a hazard. And we start looking at how we mitigate the risks around that. Now, the easiest thing is that you eliminate it, and that's not going to be possible, probably, in many situations. But we can implement ways of minimising it. And that's something that I think we should all start doing now before all of a sudden we're hit with a huge amount of technology and there's no way of managing it at all.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. And I just want to briefly say that this is a multi-pronged issue. We could argue ad infinitum, ad nauseum about the health effects or what health effects there are and how bad they are or not. But this is also an issue of the people and corporations. The corporations are becoming increasingly arrogant, increasingly usurping and making a mockery of democracy. And we see that happening very, very blatantly with the 5G issue. And we also see that we are being given a vision of the future, which includes artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, etc., all profit-making, but also of incredible social impact. And we need to look at whether we want that vision of the future imposed upon us as well. So there are 3 big issues with this, and it's not just about health. I want to thank the people on the panel, and especially Dariusz for doing all this work around New Zealand. And it's been a tremendous help because basically your expertise and your credentials will go a long way in counteracting the level that the government is listening to at the moment. And so I'd like to thank you, and in a certain way too. And we're going to have a draw from the audience as well. So these are all New Zealand products, and and this is for you and your wife, Dariusz. And Pat, we also have a New Zealand méthode champenoise. And for Sue, thank you.